The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady hush like someone weeping just outside the walls. Water licked down the warped windows of the widow's cabin, drumming against the warped shingles like knuckles at a locked door. Inside, Eleanor Wade stood barefoot on the splintered floorboards, stirring ash in a cold stove, hoping something warm might rise from it if she stirred hard enough. But nothing did. There was no firewood left. The barn roof had been leaking for months, each gust of wind peeling away another promise her late husband had made. She had stacked pots and buckets beneath the worst spots, but the sound of water dripping from beam to tin was unbearable in its rhythm. Steady, hollow, like time itself was dripping out of her life. She hadn't spoken a full sentence aloud in 3 days. A shadow moved past the gate. She saw him through the window, just the shape at first. A horse thin enough to show ribs under a soaked hide, and a rider who looked worse. The cowboy wore no coat, just a rough cotton shirt that clung to his shoulders and chest like second skin. Mud streaked his trousers, and one boot was held together with rope. His hat was so waterlogged it sagged like a dying flower. Still, he sat upright, proud in some broken, starving way. He didn't approach the door, just stared at the sagging barn roof as if studying it. She watched him through the fog pane and thought, that boy's got no right looking at my roof like it owes him something. But something about his stillness unsettled her. She opened the door anyway. "You fix things?" she asked, voice low, hoarse from disuse. He looked at her with pale eyes, too young for the hardness behind them, and nodded once. "I don't pay," she added. He dismounted slowly, wincing. "Didn't ask." The horse stayed at the gate. He walked with a limp, barely noticeable, but there. She handed him a hammer and pointed to a crate of bent nails. "You fall off that roof, I'm not dragging you back down." He didn't smile, just nodded again. By afternoon, he was barefoot, climbing up the slick wooden beams like he'd lived up there. She brought him black coffee, weak but hot, and left it near the ladder without a word. When he climbed down at dusk, soaked and shaking, she handed him a dry flour sack to wrap around his shoulders. He didn't thank her. That felt right. The name came later, not from him, but from the branded saddle, El Caro. That night, she ate the last of the boiled beans while he curled up in the hayloft like a cat too wild to come near the fire. The storm hadn't let up. Thunder broke in the distance, sharp and mean. She pulled her shawl tighter and stared at the wall. She could hear him breathing through the cracks above her head. Even breaths, not afraid of the dark. Next morning, he was already hammering. She hadn't told him to. She brought him a heel of bread and her best chipped enamel cup, filled again with bitter coffee. His hands trembled slightly when he took it. He didn't speak, just nodded, and she realized she liked his silence better than most men's voices. In town, folks were already whispering. At the mercantile, Miss Tiller cocked her head and asked, "You takin' on a boarder, Ellie?" She shrugged. "Just patchin' the barn." Miss Tiller clicked her tongue. "Patching, is it?" That night, Eleanor scrubbed her hands raw. Dirt had found its way into her nails, and she couldn't bear the idea of looking filthy. She told herself it was about hygiene, not him. But when she passed by the barn to check the buckets, she glanced up. He was watching the stars through the broken boards like they were something he could still trust. "You married?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn. "No." "You run from something?" He was quiet a long time. Then, "Not anymore." She said nothing more. Just left a blanket at the edge of the ladder before returning to her cold bed. By the third day, she noticed how his muscles worked, strong, deliberate, but never showy. How he looked down when he spoke, not out of weakness, but respect. How he didn't flinch when the rooster pecked his ankle or the hammer slammed his thumb. That night, she boiled cabbage and potatoes and poured 2 bowls instead of 1. He hesitated. "I didn't poison it," she said. He sat across from her, slowly, like someone unused to chairs. They ate without speaking. Halfway through, he looked up. "You always this quiet?" She met his gaze. "I talk when there's someone worth the words." His lip twitched. Not a smile, but close. The next morning, they worked side by side repairing the fence. When she reached for a rail too heavy, he lifted it from her arms without a word and set it in place. She didn't thank him. That felt right, too. By week's end, the barn roof was nearly whole again, patched with mismatched wood but steady underfoot. The rains stopped. The air smelled of cedar and damp soil. The quiet between them thickened, not uncomfortable, but charged. He began cleaning tools that didn't belong to him. She didn't stop him. Then came Sunday. Church bells rang out across the town miles off, but neither of them stirred. Instead, she brought out a tin of lard biscuits she'd been saving. They shared them on the porch, not facing each other, just watching the world try to dry itself. "Folks will talk," she said after a while. He nodded. "They already do. Will you leave then?" His jaw tightened. "You want me to?" She looked at him, really looked. "I don't know." A gust of wind scattered the flour sack he'd used as a towel. He chased it across the yard like a boy. She laughed before she could stop herself, a dry, foreign sound. He grinned, not wide, but honest. The first she'd seen. The sound of it stayed with her longer than she expected. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching moonlight bleed across the patched roof. No drips. No leaks. Just silence. She hadn't known how much she'd missed silence that didn't feel empty. Outside, the cowboy shifted in the hay. A soft sound, like a man trying not to dream too loud. She whispered to the glass, "Don't fix me too good, Luke Caro. I wouldn't know what to do with a mended heart." The wind moved softly against the cabin, as if it agreed. The mornings came earlier now. With the leaks stopped, sunlight spilled through the clean cracks in the shutters instead of the broken roof. The barn stood tall again, patched with uneven boards like a scarred man standing proud despite his wounds. But inside the cabin, the quiet hadn't softened, it had only deepened. She'd gotten used to the sound of him, Luke Caro, hammering, sanding, moving like a man who couldn't afford to stop. But now that the barn was near whole, there were fewer excuses for him to linger. And fewer reasons for her to stay behind the door when he looked her way. He still didn't sleep inside. Still made his bed in the hay with a saddle for a pillow. Still left her offerings of work instead of words. That morning, he'd repaired the clothesline, then started on the shutters without asking. She stood at the sink peeling potatoes, watching him from behind the curtain. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms roped with sun-browned muscle. Every swing of the hammer was careful, efficient, like he meant to stay useful but not noticed. It was the not noticing that wore on her. She dried her hands on her skirt and stepped outside with 2 cups of coffee. He didn't stop working. "Didn't ask for more," he said quietly. "I didn't ask for a man to fix every hinge on my land either," she replied. He took the cup. The steam lifted between them like something holy. "I figured I'd work till the barn was dry," he said after a pause. "It's been dry 3 days." "I know." He sat down on the edge of the porch, back against the rail. She joined him. Their boots didn't touch, but they were close enough to hear each other breathe. "Why'd you stay?" she asked. His fingers curled around the cup. "Not sure." "That's honest." He nodded, as if that alone explained it. She looked toward the barn. "My husband never fixed a thing unless someone was watching. Could talk a fence into falling just to get sympathy." Luke didn't laugh, but she could feel a thread loosen in the air between them. "I reckon I never learned much about fixing folks," he murmured. "Just fences." They sat that way for a while. The sun stretched the shadows long and golden. Birds dared to sing again. By noon, she was brushing flour off her apron when the knock came. 3 quick raps. Sharp, too sharp. She opened the door to find Miss Tiller standing there with a basket of eggs she clearly didn't intend to leave. "Thought I'd stop by," Jane said. "See if you're well. You've missed 2 church weeks, Ellie." Eleanor stepped aside, letting the woman's eyes roam without welcome. Miss Tiller spotted the second cup on the porch. Her mouth pinched. "Been busy," Eleanor said. "Roof work." Jane's eyes narrowed. "Mm. Town's been talking." Says you've taken in a vagrant. That true? I hired help. Jane sniffed. No husband, no family, and now strange men? Some of us worry you've forgotten your standing. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. I haven't forgotten anything, Jane. Just reminding you. Women like us, we get judged harsher. Folk don't forgive easy. From the barn, a steady tap-tap-tap continued. Luke hadn't paused once. Then let them talk, Eleanor said. She closed the door before Miss Tiller could finish her breath. That night, she brought supper to the barn. Beans with onions and a piece of cornbread. He sat on the hay bales, eyes wary. Town's watching, she said. I know. You plan on staying anyway? Luke looked down. I never stayed nowhere before. You could now. He didn't reply. She placed the plate in front of him and turned to leave. Ma'am, he said, voice hoarse. She stopped. He looked up. I ain't good at a skin. But if it's all the same, I'd rather be told to go than guess I'm not wanted. She looked at him then, not the boy she saw riding in that first rain, but the man he was now, hollow in places and solid in others, still learning how to belong. I'll tell you when, she said. The next day, they worked together to clear the broken wagon in the north field. He lifted, she sorted. The wind picked up dust and memory. At one point, she tripped on a buried iron hook, falling hard to her knees. Luke was there in an instant, kneeling beside her, hands rough but gentle against her elbow. You all right? He asked. She nodded, teeth clenched. Only my pride. He offered his hand. She didn't take it at first. But then, she did. And something passed between their fingers. Heat, weight, recognition. He pulled her up slow. Later that night, she found a row of small wildflowers on the edge of the porch, wound into a little string. He didn't mention it, and neither did she. But she kept them. 2 days later, the sheriff rode in. Big man, big voice. Miss Wade, he called from his saddle. You got someone squatting out here? Town wants to know. Eleanor stood on her porch. He's working. Got papers. I don't ask for papers to hammer nails. Sheriff Harlan Motes scratched his beard. Town's uneasy. Some say he's dangerous. She stepped off the porch, barefoot in the grass. He ain't. You sure? She didn't answer. Luke stepped out from behind the barn, silent. Motes looked him over. You respect this land? Luke nodded once. Every board of it. Motes grunted. Then you'd best give 'em nothing to fear. Town's got long memory for short tempers. He turned his horse and rode off. That night, she found Luke sitting by the well, head in hands. She didn't speak, just lowered herself beside him. I never meant to bring trouble here, he said quietly. You didn't. I just wanted, he trailed off. She waited. Some place to stay still. She reached out and touched the back of his hand. You've built half this place, she said. You think that was nothing? He looked at her then, raw and uncertain. They'll keep talking. I've outlived worse. His hand turned under hers, holding. I ain't got much to give, he whispered. You fixed the roof, she said. And that's more than anyone's done in years. The wind rose again that night, sharp with the scent of an early storm. But inside, the windows stayed dry, the rafters firm. No leaks. No cold. Eleanor stood by the fire, cradling a mug between her palms. Luke sat near, boots off, shirt sleeves rolled. For once, the silence between them felt like peace. But the knock came again. Harder this time. 4 fists, maybe more. A voice snarled from the dark. You in there, Widow Wade? Got a man shacked up in your barn? Or are you just playin' house now? Luke stood. So did she. He reached for the door. She beat him to it. She stepped outside into the lantern light, shoulders square, voice steady. This is my land. My roof. My choice. Someone laughed. Didn't take long to forget your vows, did it? Eleanor raised her chin. My vows died with the man who broke them. What I have now is honest. Luke stood behind her, a shadow ready to defend but not steal her voice. The crowd hesitated. Then the sheriff's voice again. That's enough. Let 'em be. The others melted away into the dark. Back inside, Eleanor's hands trembled. Luke reached for her, but she stepped back, breathing hard. I thought I'd forgotten how to fight, she whispered. But I guess I just needed something worth fighting for. He didn't speak, just looked at her, every line in his face saying he understood. Then she turned to him, voice shaking. You staying? He nodded. She crossed the room and stood inches away. Then you'd best learn to make biscuits. I won't be the only one feeding us. He smiled, small but real. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Inside, for the first time in years, she laughed. Not soft, store-bought loaves, but hand-kneaded rough bread from flour that had gone slightly bitter in the bag. Eleanor's hands, long unpracticed in such tasks, remembered anyway. She stirred with wooden spoons and silence, the rhythm of kneading giving her a place to set her thoughts down. Luke would split wood before sunup and come in when he smelled the baking. He never asked for breakfast, but always arrived just as she laid the warm loaf down. They didn't speak much. But the way she passed him the knife and the way he always poured her first cup of coffee, it became its own language. One built without declarations or explanations. A language of survival, of mutual noticing. One morning, as the wind rattled the shutters and a hawk circled low, Eleanor hummed while kneading, soft and low, an old church tune her mother used to sing over pie crust. She didn't even notice she was doing it until she glanced up and saw Luke frozen in the doorway, one hand on the edge of the frame. His face looked like a man caught between memories and breath. She stopped. You know it? She asked. He nodded, eyes distant. My ma sang it. Just once that I recall. She was sick. Couldn't finish the second verse. Eleanor didn't move. Luke stepped in, closed the door behind him. The silence between them changed shape. I was maybe 6, he said, settling into the corner chair. We'd buried Pa a week before. She died that winter. She nodded, softly. I lost my mama on a February night. Cold took her lungs before grief did. He looked down at his boots, then back up. Funny how the world don't stop. Just keeps turning. Roofs leak. Animals need feeding. Folks still talk. Eleanor sliced the loaf. The knife crackled through crust, revealing a steam that curled into the still air. We keep moving, she said. But some songs stay, even if we hum 'em crooked. He smiled faintly. That yours was straight enough. That evening, she caught herself humming again while sweeping. This time, she didn't stop. Days passed like that, one gesture at a time. Luke brought in a crate of wild apples one afternoon, bruised but fragrant. She baked them into tarts. He fixed the broken hinge on the smokehouse door. She stitched the tear in his shirt. A dance, slow and cautious, like two animals learning they weren't being hunted. The town still watched, but quieter now. Not from a distance, but from behind curtained windows and turned backs. A widow and a man with no past. Folk didn't know how to file them. And what they didn't understand, they feared. Miss Tiller had stopped coming by. The preacher hadn't sent a word. But when Eleanor went into town to barter eggs for salt, the grocer's boy gave her a small sack of sugar by mistake. She said nothing, just nodded her thanks. The sugar went into peach preserves, and the preserves into a pie. She left it cooling on the windowsill, half in rebellion, half in invitation. Luke returned from clearing brush behind the barn, shirtless from the heat, hair damp from effort. He hesitated when he saw the pie. Is that for a holiday? He asked. She shook her head. No holiday. He paused. Then why? She shrugged, but her eyes gave her away. He leaned on the windowsill. Don't reckon I've ever had pie without a reason. Then here's your first. He took a slice without a plate, as if something primal had broken loose in him. Juice ran down his hand. He laughed, embarrassed. Eleanor handed him a rag and said, "You've got peach on your pride." He wiped his face, grinning. "You're dangerous, Widow Wade." She turned away, cheeks hot, but not from shame. That night, thunder rolled far off. The kind that stayed on the edge of the world but made every living thing restless. Eleanor stood at the stove, tea in her hand. Luke lingered in the doorway, not quite in or out. She broke the silence. "I used to sing in church. Before I married." He stepped in, cautiously. "He didn't like it?" She sipped. "Said it drew attention. Said women ought to be heard only in prayer." Luke didn't answer, but his fists clenched. "I stopped," she said. "And I forgot how much that silence cost me." He looked at her, gaze steady. "You've got a voice again." She nodded, but her smile was sad. Still figuring out what it wants to say. Luke stepped forward, slowly. "When I was 17, I tried to sign up for the railroad gangs. Lied about my age. They didn't care. Spent 3 years pounding track into a country that never remembered my name." She studied him. "Why'd you leave?" He hesitated. "Too many graves. I got tired of running past them." The silence between them thickened again, but this time it wasn't empty. It held the weight of everything unspoken. Grief. Regret. Hope, maybe. He turned to go. But at the threshold, he stopped. "You hum like someone who used to be loved," he said. Her breath caught. "And you fix things like someone who never was." He left without another word. The next morning, she found a birdhouse nailed to the old elm. Painted rough, crookedly sweet. Her name carved underneath, faint but careful, E. Wade. She touched the letters like they were sacred. Then she looked toward the barn. By noon, they sat again on the porch, peeling apples in silence. "What now?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. He tried again. Roofs fixed. Wagons cleared. Tools cleaned. What now? She peeled an apple in one long curl, then broke it in half. "You ever planted anything?" she asked. He shook his head. She handed him one half of the apple. "Then let's start there." Over the next days, they turned the soil behind the cabin, shoveling rocks and tilling old roots. Luke moved with strength, Eleanor with memory. They planted onions and beans. He found a broken horseshoe and nailed it to the garden gate. At dusk, they stood at the edge of their work, sweaty and aching. "You think it'll grow?" he asked. "Things grow where you tend them." He nodded. "You talk like the preacher sometimes." She gave him a look. He never planted a damn thing in his life. Luke chuckled. Then he grew quiet. "You know folks are waiting for us to fail." She nodded. "I'm not trying to prove 'em wrong. I just want to stop living like they're right." He stepped closer, eyes dark and unreadable. "You deserve more than surviving." "So do you," she said. Neither moved. Then she stepped back first, heart pounding too loud for words. That night, a fiddle song drifted from the distance, a wedding at the far edge of the valley. The sound of laughter. Joy from other lives. Eleanor sat at the window, a candle flickering beside her. Luke passed behind her, heading for the barn. She turned. "Would you stay?" she asked. "Even if the work's done?" He looked at her long and full. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether I'm welcome." She stood. "You've got peach pie and a carved birdhouse. What more welcome do you need?" He smiled, but it held something fragile. "I'll stay," he said. "But not as a ghost in the loft." She understood, and feared it. "But still," she nodded. "Then stay. As a man." That night, he did not go to the barn. She laid out a blanket by the hearth. He took it. She poured tea. He drank it. The fire cracked between them, the only voice in the room. And when she hummed that same broken hymn, he joined her. Out of tune. Unsteady. But together. The day they painted the barn was too warm for October, but the wind still carried a sharpness that whispered of coming frost. Luke rolled his sleeves, shoulders bronzed under the sun, and Eleanor stood beside him in a smock that once belonged to her mother. Together, they worked in near silence, red paint staining their hands, the brush strokes slow and methodical, as if baptizing would back into purpose. By mid-afternoon, the old barn gleamed fresh and proud. It looked like something newly born. Eleanor stepped back to admire it, hand on her hip. Luke reached over and wiped a dot of paint from her cheek with his thumb. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile either, but she didn't move away. I reckon it's the finest barn this side of the ridge, he said. She raised an eyebrow. That's a low bar. Still, something settled between them. Not joy exactly, but the quiet contentment of something built, something that would last a season longer than anyone expected. That night, he stayed inside again. There was no talk of it. No threshold crossed. Just the creak of the floorboards as he walked in after brushing off the tools, the dip of the mattress near the fire as he lay on his side, and her breath, calm, as she set a second cup on the table out of habit, not hesitation. They lived, for a time, like no one was watching. But someone was. The first sign came in the form of salt. Or rather, the lack of it. Eleanor went to town, list in hand, and found the grocer's door shut early. A note tacked to the wood, "Closed to your widows who disrespect decency." She stood still for a long time, basket hanging off her arm. Behind her, laughter from the saloon spilled into the street. She turned and saw two women watching her from the steps of the dressmakers. One smirked. The other looked away too quickly. She walked home empty-handed. Luke met her at the gate. She didn't say anything, just handed him the list. He read it once, then folded it slowly and tucked it into his back pocket. "I'll ride out tomorrow," he said. "Another town." She nodded, eyes not meeting his. That night, she sang again. Not the hymn. A fuller tune. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she stopped, ashamed. Luke said nothing, just reached across the table and took her hand. The days darkened early now. Shadows climbed faster across the valley, and the fire stayed lit through most of the morning. The cabin grew cozier, but the world outside turned colder. One evening, just as dusk kissed the tips of the wheatgrass, the preacher came. Reverend Dent stood tall on the porch, hat in hand, boots clean despite the road. Luke opened the door. "Is Eleanor home?" the preacher asked, polite. Luke stepped aside. "She is." Eleanor came from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "Reverend." "Ma'am." He glanced around, then settled his gaze on the fire. "Mind if I speak to you alone?" Luke began to retreat. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "He stays." The preacher hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." He remained standing, hat pressed to his chest like a shield. "Folk are talking, Eleanor," he began. "They always have. But now they bring your name into prayer requests." She tilted her head. "Let them pray, then." He sighed. "It's not just gossip. There are calls for action. Some say the land deed should be reviewed. Others suggest you've strayed from decency." Luke's jaw tightened. Eleanor's chin lifted. "I've fed the poor," she said. "Mended every widow's hem in this county. Buried my husband with hands still bleeding from digging his grave. And now I've dared to live." Dent lowered his eyes. "It's not me, Eleanor. It's the town." "It was never you," she whispered. The preacher placed his hat back on his head. "Just be careful. Flames catch quick in dry places." Then he left. That night, the barn burned. It started after midnight. A low, distant crackle like ice snapping on a pond, then a sudden sharp flare through the window. Luke was up first, rushing out barefoot. Eleanor followed, grabbing a bucket, her breath catching in her chest. The side of the barn was ablaze, flames licking high into the black sky. The horses had already bolted. The air stank of oil and smoke. Luke shouted her name through the chaos. "I'm here!" she cried, choking on soot. They worked together in rhythm, bucket after bucket, their shadows wild against the firelight. But it was too fast. Too deliberate. By the time dawn touched the hills, half the barn was gone. A blackened carcass of wood stood smoking and skeletal. The birdhouse on the elm was ash. Luke dropped to his knees. Eleanor stood, wrapped in a blanket, eyes hollow. Someone had lit it. Someone wanted her shamed again. Wanted her stripped of what little she'd rebuilt. Luke rose slowly, approached her. "We'll fix it." She didn't answer. "I swear it, Eleanor. We'll rebuild." She turned to him then, tears carving through ash on her cheeks. "It's not just the barn," she whispered. "It's what it meant." He stepped closer. "Then we'll make something new. Something they can't burn." She leaned against him, shaking. They stood like that until the sun rose fully, golden and cruel, illuminating the wreckage. 3 days later, the sheriff rode out. Harlan Motes surveyed the remains of the barn with narrowed eyes. "You got enemies?" he asked Luke. "Plenty," Luke answered. "None with names." The sheriff spat. "Nobody saw a thing. Town's blind when it wants to be." He looked to Eleanor. "You want justice?" "I want peace." He tipped his hat. "Peace costs. You willing to pay?" She glanced at Luke, then back to the sheriff. "I've paid enough." Motes nodded once. "Then keep your heads down." They didn't rebuild the barn. They cleared it. Made a garden where the foundation had been. Blackened earth, turned and sown with seeds. Luke carved another birdhouse, smaller this time, unpainted, and nailed it to the elm again. But the silence between them grew taut. One night, she found him packing. A small satchel. A canteen. A folded shirt. Her throat closed. "You're leaving." "I thought it'd be easier." "For whom?" "For you. They won't stop. You know that." She stepped into the room, slowly. "They didn't stop when my husband hit me, either. Or when the mortgage collector tried to take this land. I stayed." He looked up, eyes shadowed. "But they didn't burn it until me." She swallowed. "Then let them burn." He paused. "I can't keep costing you. And I can't keep losing what I've barely begun to have." They stood in the stillness, two broken halves trying to find the same rhythm. Finally, she said, "If you leave, I won't stop you. But know this, I never needed rescuing. I needed choosing." Luke dropped the satchel, stepped forward, and kissed her, not with passion, but reverence, as if sealing something old, something sacred. Outside, the stars blinked through the smoke-stained air. Inside, her hands gripped his shirt like she feared waking up alone. The next morning, the preacher returned. This time, with paper. A marriage license. "I figured," he said, not unkindly, "if they're gonna talk, might as well give them a reason." Eleanor signed her name first. Luke's hand trembled as he took the pen. Reverend Dent raised his eyes. "You sure?" Luke looked at Eleanor. "Always have been." The preacher nodded. "Then let's not wait." Snow fell before the sun rose, soft and slow, as if heaven itself were laying down a hush over the land. Each flake turned the ashes of the burned barn white, hiding what had blackened, softening what had splintered. Eleanor stood at the cabin window in her wedding dress, a simple, hand-mended ivory thing from her mother's hope chest. It had never been worn before. She smoothed the sleeves, her fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the strange, living quiet inside her chest. Luke stood outside in the yard, alone, brushing snow from the porch rail. He wore the only good shirt he had, freshly laundered and tucked in. His boots were polished as best he could manage. He didn't shift or fidget. He just stared out toward the tree line where the wind curled in and out like it was testing the world's breath. She stepped out without a word, the snow crunching beneath her boots. No music played. No guests gathered. Only the preacher waited beneath the old elm, Bible closed against his chest, hat dusted white. The birdhouse above him swayed gently, a single sparrow perched beside it, unmoved by the cold. They met halfway, Luke and Eleanor, not with ceremony but certainty. His eyes locked on hers as though he'd forgotten the sky entirely. She stopped just short of him and took his hand. The silence between them was weightless now, no longer hiding shame, no longer burdened by fear. Just full. The preacher cleared his throat. "We can begin when you're ready." Neither answered. They turned together, hand in hand, to face him. "Do you, Luke Caro," the preacher began, "take Eleanor Wade as your lawfully?" "I do," Luke said, soft and sure. "And do you, Eleanor?" "I do," she whispered. "Then by God and this valley as witness, I pronounce." A crack rang out. Not thunder. Not fire. A single gunshot split the air. Luke stepped forward instinctively, drawing Eleanor behind him. From the ridge above, a rider appeared. Then two more. Town men. One held a rifle lazily across his saddle. The others leaned in with narrowed eyes. "You gonna let that stand, Dent?" one called down. "We don't recognize no outlaw marriage." The preacher raised his voice. "They've signed. There's no law against love. You think a paper keeps her decent?" Another man spat. Luke's voice came low and sharp. "You take one more step and you'll see how decent I can be." Eleanor touched his back gently. "No, not like this." She stepped past him. The wind caught her dress, flaring it like a flag. The snow fell heavier now, gathering in her hair, lining the folds of her sleeves. She looked up at the men on the ridge, her face still and unafraid. "I've buried one husband, I've fought for this land, and I've endured more shame than you'll ever carry," she called out. "This man stood beside me while you threw stones in the dark." The riders hesitated. One turned his horse. Another muttered, "She was always stubborn." The third simply spat into the snow and turned away. One by one, they disappeared back into the trees. Luke exhaled. The preacher opened his Bible again. "Let the Lord bless this union, and let no man tear it down." Eleanor looked at Luke. "I want to remember this moment," she said. He smiled, eyes wet. "So do I." Their kiss was not fiery, not rushed. It was steady, sacred, two hands finding the same rhythm, two souls binding where pain once lived. Snow dusted their shoulders. The fire inside the cabin glowed behind them. Later inside, Luke pulled her shawl around her shoulders, his hands brushing along her back like he was memorizing each breath. They sat near the hearth, her legs tucked under her, his fingers tangled with hers. "Was it what you wanted?" he asked. "It was what I chose." They didn't speak of what came next. But the garden was still waiting to be planted in spring. The roof still needed a coat of oil. The tools had rust to be scrubbed clean. Life would go on. Small. Honest. Before bed, she whispered, "You've made me something new." He replied, "So have you." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing every scar, every ash-laced memory. Not erasing the past, but giving it peace. And somewhere between silence and flame, shame and vow, a love was born that neither wind nor gossip could tear down.